And the winner is marvelous Meryl Streep.
She's the gold standard, the master of restraint, and the high priestess of preparation. But behind the awards and acclaim, Meryl Streep has never been afraid to draw a line.
My relationship to acting is like it always was, even when I was a kid. I think I am who I say I am.
In a business built on flattery, she never fakes admiration. And when a co-star offends her artistic standards, the chill she delivers speaks louder than scandal. Meryl doesn't feud. She outlasts. And for 6 actors across 5 decades, working with her meant stepping into a silent war. These aren't tabloid fights. These are quiet excommunications, and each one reveals something unforgettable about what it truly means to be great and to fall short. Dustin Hoffman, Meryl Streep has built her career on precision. Every movement she makes on screen and every syllable she delivers is the result of research, preparation, and emotional intent. For her, acting is a craft of discipline, not chaos. So when she began work on Kramer vs. Kramer in 1978, she expected to collaborate with professionals who valued structure and trust. Instead, she found herself clashing with a performer who operated on an entirely different frequency. That performer was Dustin Hoffman. At the time, Hoffman was already an acclaimed actor known for his raw intensity and unpredictable methods. He believed that truth emerged through disruption, through surprise, through instinct. Meryl, on the other hand, believed that truth came through consistency, structure, and respect. Their philosophies were not just incompatible, they were in direct opposition to each other. The tension between them was immediate. Hoffman frequently altered scenes without warning, improvising dialogue and gestures in ways that threw off the rhythm Meryl had carefully constructed. He approached acting as if it were a live wire, needing to be touched without fear. Meryl approached it more like surgery, meticulous, intentional, and deeply internal. Where Hoffman chased emotional explosions, Meryl sought layered truth through psychological nuance. During one early rehearsal, the conflict became physical. Hoffman, in an unscripted moment, slapped Meryl across the face. It was not part of the scene. It was not discussed. He did it without permission, believing it would provoke a real reaction. Meryl did not stop the scene. She finished the take. But the moment changed everything. Later, she explained that trust is the foundation of her process. Without it, acting becomes something else entirely. Something hostile, even traumatic. Hoffman may have seen the slap as a tool to unlock authenticity, but for Meryl, it was an act of disrespect. She did not raise her voice. She did not retaliate. She simply drew a line in the sand that would never be erased. Director Robert Benton found himself constantly mediating between the two. He admitted years later that the emotional friction between Meryl and Dustin created some of the most compelling moments in the film. But what audiences interpreted as dramatic chemistry was, in truth, the residue of creative conflict. Behind every scene of tenderness or confrontation was a silent struggle for control between two actors who no longer trusted one another. The scenes between Joanna and Ted Kramer were intense, intimate, and emotionally charged. But off-camera, their interactions were strained, distant, and cold. Meryl would retreat to her corner of the set, working quietly, preparing alone. Hoffman remained energetic, loud, and unpredictable. Crew members observed the atmosphere shift whenever both were in the room, as if the tension between them affected the air itself. Despite the turmoil, Kramer vs. Kramer became a cultural landmark. Meryl's performance earned her an Academy Award, and Hoffman's portrayal was praised as one of his finest. But once filming ended, their professional relationship ended as well. Meryl never worked with him again. In later interviews, she acknowledged the difficulty of the shoot without naming the exact moments that defined her discomfort. She referred to their work together as difficult but artistically worthwhile. She never praised his methods. She never suggested they would collaborate again. Her restraint said more than any tell-all ever could. Years passed, and stories about Hoffman's behavior with other women began to emerge. In that context, Meryl's silence around their collaboration began to seem more pointed. She never publicly addressed those allegations, but the fact that she had kept her distance for decades spoke volumes. While others defended or excused him, she simply stayed quiet, allowing time to clarify what her words never had to explain. What makes this story so significant is not just the clash between two legends. It is the way Meryl handled it. She did not retaliate in public. She did not expose private grievances for attention. She simply chose never to share a set with him again. She let the work stand, but she never forgot what it cost. Meryl Streep demands excellence. She does not tolerate recklessness disguised as genius. With Dustin Hoffman, she delivered one of the most unforgettable performances of her life. And then, without spectacle or scandal, she walked away. Because for Meryl, greatness is not only about what you create on screen. It is about how you behave off it. And once that line is crossed, there is no returning. What happens when the conflict isn't loud, but slow burning? When no one shouts, no one strikes, and yet every rehearsal feels like a quiet war? If Dustin Hoffman brought chaos to Meryl's set, Kevin Kline brought contradiction, a charming presence with a clashing process that made even the most intimate scenes feel like negotiations. Because sometimes the sharpest divisions aren't born from aggression. They come from two brilliant minds who simply cannot meet in the middle. And for Meryl, that middle ground was never an option. Kevin Kline. When Meryl Streep took on the role of Sophie Zawistowski in Sophie's Choice, she approached it the way a historian might approach an unsolved case. She spent months studying Holocaust testimonies, Polish speech rhythms, and survivor psychology. She internalized the trauma until it lived beneath her skin. Every movement, every breath, every whisper had weight. Sophie wasn't a performance for Meryl. She was a responsibility. Kevin Kline, cast opposite her as the volatile Nathan Landau, came to the project from a different place entirely. It was his first film role, and while he was already a celebrated stage actor, his methods leaned toward intuition. He believed in discovering his character in the moment, allowing emotion to shape behavior, not the other way around. He did not arrive on set with the same research-heavy process that Meryl brought. He trusted spontaneity. She trusted preparation, and neither trusted the other's approach. Their first rehearsals revealed the difference immediately. Meryl came in with a fully constructed character. Her accent was already refined. Her posture had changed. Her expressions were carefully calculated, yet emotionally honest. Kevin, by contrast, was still exploring. He was experimenting with Nathan's energy, trying different rhythms, still testing the waters. What for him was playful discovery felt, to Meryl, like a lack of discipline. The tension grew as they moved deeper into the emotional core of the film. Meryl's scenes often required stillness, pauses filled with meaning, and gestures that echoed Sophie's inner pain. Kevin's energy, though vibrant and captivating, sometimes disrupted that balance. His emotional swings clashed with Meryl's restraint. She needed consistency. He brought unpredictability. The dissonance between them was not theatrical. It was philosophical. Director Alan J. Pakula tried to bridge the gap. He believed that their contrast would add realism to the story. A damaged woman and her erratic lover, bound together by trauma and obsession. And on screen, that contrast worked. But off-screen, it left bruises. Their dynamic never erupted into confrontation, but it simmered beneath every take. Between scenes, they remained cordial. They delivered their lines. They hit their marks. But they never found rhythm together. One particular moment deepened the rift. Kevin reportedly questioned the intensity of Meryl's accent work. He wondered aloud whether it was too technical, whether audiences might struggle to access Sophie's emotions through such precise articulation. Meryl did not respond with anger. She responded with silence. To her, that comment wasn't just criticism of a voice. It was a dismissal of everything she had done to honor Sophie's truth. The accent was not decoration. It was survival. And to suggest otherwise was to misunderstand the purpose of her work entirely. Crew members noticed how Meryl began to distance herself during shoots. She kept her focus narrowed. She reduced small talk. While Kevin remained sociable and relaxed, Meryl grew colder, more focused, more guarded. She didn't argue. She didn't explain. She simply poured everything into the character and left the rest behind the curtain. The final scenes of the film were among the most emotionally harrowing either actor had ever performed. Meryl, carrying the weight of Sophie's impossible past, delivered a performance that shook audiences and critics alike. Kevin, with his explosive portrayal of Nathan, matched her intensity in bursts. But when the credits rolled, it was clear who had paid the higher price for that brilliance. Meryl walked away with an Oscar. Kevin walked away with questions. In interviews following the film's release, Kevin praised Meryl's performance, but described her method as academic. The word lingered in the air. For Meryl, it represented a subtle but cutting critique, one that implied her preparation lacked spontaneity, that her craft was more study than soul. She never publicly addressed the comment. She never criticized him in return, but she also never worked with him again. Their paths crossed at events, premieres, award shows. They posed for photos. They smiled politely. But those who knew them understood that the distance between them had become permanent. Meryl Streep values work that honors its subject with reverence. Kevin Kline values freedom within form. Neither is wrong. But in the world Meryl inhabits, anything less than total commitment to authenticity feels like a betrayal, not of her, but of the story itself. What makes their conflict compelling is how invisible it remained to the public. There were no arguments caught on camera, no gossip columns spinning stories of rage. There was just the work, and the quiet choice never to collaborate again. Because sometimes the sharpest rejection is not a scandal. It is simply absence. Jack Nicholson challenged something even deeper, her very definition of what it means to act. While others clashed with her on process, Jack represented a philosophy that Meryl could never accept. Where she saw character as transformation, he saw it as extension. And in that mirror, she saw everything she rejected about Hollywood. Jack Nicholson. In Hollywood, some actors become famous for disappearing into roles. Others become famous for never disappearing at all. Jack Nicholson belongs to the latter. His smirk, his voice, and his energy are instantly recognizable. Directors cast him not to become someone else, but to bring his version of that someone to life. Meryl Streep, however, belongs to a very different school of performance. She believes in total transformation, and for her, charisma is never a substitute for craft. Meryl and Jack never shared a full-length feature, but They came close, more than once. Throughout the 1980s and 1990s, they were both considered for multiple high-profile dramas. On paper, their pairings should have been iconic. Two of the greatest actors of their generation. Two stars who had reshaped the definition of cinematic excellence. But behind the scenes, it quickly became clear that Meryl had no interest in working alongside Jack. Not because of personal animosity, but because of what he represented. In interviews, Jack often dismissed method acting and formal preparation. He once called it intellectual nonsense, insisting that true acting came from instinct and presence. He believed emotion should come naturally, that rehearsals should be minimal, and that overthinking a scene could kill its soul. Meryl disagreed entirely. She believed in deep research, in understanding a character's history, in building voice, movement, and inner life from scratch. To her, Jack's approach felt lazy. Worse, it felt arrogant. Casting director Juliet Taylor once noted that Meryl's silence about Jack spoke volumes. She didn't attack him, but she declined every project where he was attached. She did not want to share space with someone who arrived on set as himself and left the same way. Meryl believed that an actor's job was to disappear. Jack believed that an actor's job was to command attention. That philosophical divide made collaboration impossible. When they did appear together, at award shows, charity events, or occasional industry panels, their interaction was limited to professional pleasantries. They smiled for cameras, shook hands when necessary, but never lingered in conversation. Observers noted that Meryl often redirected questions away from Jack or reframed discussions toward other actors. She praised Daniel Day-Lewis. She celebrated younger talents like Saoirse Ronan. But she never placed Jack in her circle of influence. Not because he lacked talent, but because he lacked the rigor she believed acting demanded. At one press junket, when asked if she would ever consider a film with Nicholson, Meryl replied simply, "I admire many of his performances." She did not say yes. She did not say no. But for those who understood her precision with words, the absence of commitment said enough. In her world, acting was sacred. Jack treated it like performance art, often brilliant, often entertaining, but rarely built from the ground up. What truly confirmed their incompatibility came not through private disputes but through Jack's own public comments. He often ridiculed what he called over-rehearsed actors, suggesting that too much preparation led to flat, disconnected performances. In one infamous interview, he described extensive backstory creation as masturbation for the brain meant to impress critics, not move audiences. Those remarks, never directed at Meryl by name, still landed close to her style. For her, every accent she mastered, every physical choice she explored, was not for show. It was to protect the truth of the character. Directors who worked with both understood the difference immediately. Jack wanted the spotlight. Meryl wanted the story. And when you are trying to tell a story built on pain, silence, or subtlety, competing egos can crush the narrative. Meryl never allowed that into her workspace. Her boundary wasn't about rivalry. It was about preservation. Their almost collaborations became industry legend. Scripts passed to both sides of the table were quietly declined. Producers hoping for chemistry between legends were met with polite refusals. Meryl never criticized Jack directly, but when others asked what kind of actors she preferred to work with, her answers always included the words discipline, research, and selflessness. Those words excluded Jack without naming him. Over time, Jack faded from the spotlight, stepping back from films and retreating into his iconic legacy. Meryl, on the other hand, remained a fixture of serious cinema, earning roles that required transformation, courage, and empathy. Their careers became a study in contrast, one rooted in flamboyance, the other in introspection. And in that contrast, Meryl made her choice clear. She didn't hate Jack Nicholson, but she refused to join him in any performance where style threatened to overpower substance. Because for her, being great was never about being unforgettable. It was about being unrecognizable. Alec Baldwin. When Nancy Meyers began casting her 2009 romantic comedy It's Complicated, she had a vision. She wanted charm, maturity, intelligence, and chemistry that felt both electric and earned. Meryl Streep, who was riding a second wave of cinematic dominance after The Devil Wears Prada and Mamma Mia, was the natural lead. Opposite her, Meyers cast Alec Baldwin, a performer known for his comedic timing and rakish charm. On paper, the pairing promised something rare. Two seasoned actors with wit and gravity, ready to redefine romantic comedy for grown-ups. What unfolded instead was a creative mismatch that neither actor would openly admit, but which shaped the entire production. Meryl came to set with her usual rigor. Her character, Jane Adler, was more than just a woman in a love triangle. She had depth, regret, inner contradictions, and a history that needed careful shaping. Meryl constructed her performance from the ground up, thinking about body language, vocal shifts, and subtle expressions that revealed everything her character couldn't say out loud. Alec arrived with a different energy. He relied on instincts, punchy delivery, and a confidence in his own comedic presence that had served him well for decades. From the start, their rhythms clashed. Alec loved to improvise. He would alter lines, insert quips, and shift the tone of scenes with spontaneity that played well for laughs, but not for layered storytelling. Meryl, by contrast, had timed her emotional beats to the cadence of the script. Every scene had a pulse, and when Alec deviated from it, the pulse stuttered. Their differences weren't explosive. There were no screaming matches, but the air between them thickened as the production moved forward. Crew members began to notice the adjustment. Meryl requested more rehearsal time. She began staying longer on set between takes, recalibrating her performance around Alec's unpredictability. Script supervisor Diane Dreyer later commented that Meryl approached comedy like a surgeon, cutting carefully, precisely, only when the moment demanded it. Alec, on the other hand, treated comedic scenes like a playground. The contrast, while not visible on screen, created tension that echoed across every take. There was a scene in the film's second act where Jane and Jake, played by Baldwin, share a quiet, emotionally complex dinner. Meryl had prepared that moment with restraint, planning to let silence carry the emotion. Alec arrived on set and began suggesting small changes, extra lines, unscripted reactions. Meryl didn't protest outwardly. She didn't challenge him. But after the take, she quietly asked for a reset. She wanted to find her own space in the scene again. That reset spoke volumes. Over time, Nancy Meyers began blocking scenes more carefully, giving both actors room to perform without stepping on each other's process. She did not choose sides. She simply adapted, shaping the film around the limitations of their chemistry. To the audience, none of this was visible. The final product was charming, funny, and commercially successful. But to those who were there, it was clear that something had been lost. The spark was functional, not magical. Alec, ever the showman, praised Meryl in interviews. He called her a genius and the best we've got. Meryl responded politely but without warmth. She focused on the film, the director, the experience. She never criticized Alec, but when asked about working with comedic actors, she made subtle distinctions, praising those who, as she put it, build their humor into the architecture of the character, rather than throwing it at the walls to see what sticks. She never named Alec Baldwin in those discussions. She didn't have to. The message was clear. After It's Complicated, Meryl never appeared in another film alongside Baldwin. Though their paths crossed at award shows and charity events, their conversations remained brief, their interactions courteous. To this day, she has never expressed interest in a second collaboration. Because, for Meryl Streep, comedy is not a break from craft. It is a deeper demand of it. It requires timing, truth, and discipline. And when a co-star disrupts that rhythm, even with good intentions, the damage cannot be undone. She did not hate Alec Baldwin, but she never let him back into her creative space. Jeremy Irons did something far more cerebral. He clashed not with her emotions, but with her intellect. Their performances were shaped by similar classical training, but when they finally shared the stage, it became clear that shared roots meant nothing when the philosophies built atop them were in direct conflict. Jeremy Irons. When Meryl Streep and Jeremy Irons were cast in a prestige drama in the early 2000s, expectations were sky high. Two classically trained actors with decades of accolades between them, both celebrated for their intelligence, their diction, and their ability to carry films with restraint and elegance. To the public, it seemed inevitable that they would create something transcendent together. What the public never saw was how their partnership quietly unraveled under the weight of competing ideals about what acting is supposed to be. From the first table read, something felt off. Both performers had arrived fully prepared, lines memorized, characters sketched, accents rehearsed. But where Meryl spoke with emotional specificity, Jeremy delivered his lines like a beautifully rehearsed monologue. His cadence was elegant. His timing was flawless. But to Meryl, it felt distant, disconnected from the character's emotional truth. She believed that great acting was not just about control, but about surrendering to the psychology of the role. Jeremy, in contrast, performed like he was still on the stage at the Royal Shakespeare Company. Every gesture measured, every word articulated, but none of it lived in the body. They were never unkind to each other. On set, their conversations were polite. Their rehearsals were professional. But behind closed doors, frustration grew. Meryl would often ask for additional rehearsal time to find the emotional temperature of a scene. Jeremy preferred to keep things efficient. He believed over-rehearsing dulled spontaneity. Meryl believed the opposite. And with every day, their scenes began to suffer from a lack of unity. The director, a veteran of period dramas, saw the disconnect and tried to bridge it. He encouraged Jeremy to explore vulnerability, to drop the mask and allow imperfection. But Irons, confident in his approach, held firm. Meryl, rather than confront him directly, simply recalibrated. She adjusted her scenes to work around him rather than with him. She delivered her performance through her character's emotional truth, while Jeremy floated beside her like an observer, poised but unreachable. Their most intense scene together, one that should have marked the emotional climax of the film, became a technical exercise. Meryl cried, not with theatrical flair, but with the controlled devastation of someone barely holding herself together. Jeremy responded with grace, with clarity, with poise. It was flawless on paper. But on the monitor, the director saw something missing. The chemistry wasn't broken. It had never formed in the first place. Later, in private interviews, Meryl described the experience in abstract terms. She said that sometimes two great actors can meet and simply not hear each other. She didn't name Jeremy Irons. She didn't have to. Industry insiders already knew the story. And for those who watched the final film, the absence of connection was quietly apparent. Every scene between them was well acted, but none were alive. The quiet rift between them deepened when, during a press tour, Jeremy was asked about working with Meryl. He offered praise, calling her disciplined and technically masterful, but added that sometimes performances become too intellectual to feel spontaneous. The phrasing echoed previous critiques made by actors who struggled with Meryl's thoroughness. For her, it was not about being clever. It was about being prepared. Jeremy's comment stung, not because it was harsh, but because it dismissed everything her process was designed to protect. Meryl never responded publicly, but at the film's final cast gathering, she was noticeably absent. And when asked years later if she would work with Jeremy again, her response was simple. "We had very different views on the work." She did not elaborate. Their conflict was never about ego or power. It was about philosophy. Jeremy treated acting as refinement. Meryl treated it as excavation. He wanted to polish the character until it gleamed. She wanted to dig until the raw truth bled through. In the end, both delivered strong performances, but only one of them walked away feeling heard. And for Meryl, hearing is the core of the work. It is not enough to act well. It has to feel real, live in the body, and honor the psychology behind the voice. Jeremy Irons was never her enemy, but he was never her partner either. And in her world, that line is the one that matters most. Gwyneth Paltrow. When Gwyneth Paltrow burst into Hollywood in the 1990s, she arrived with all the right connections, effortless charisma, and the kind of polished screen presence that made critics and casting directors take notice. But to Meryl Streep, who had clawed her way into the spotlight through relentless discipline and deep emotional research, Gwyneth didn't represent a rising peer. She represented something far more troubling, the erosion of craft beneath the weight of image. Their paths crossed during awards seasons, charity galas, and round tables where the industry gathered its elite. On the surface, there was mutual civility. Meryl smiled for the cameras. Gwyneth returned the courtesy, but behind those practiced expressions was a tension felt by those close enough to see it. Meryl did not see in Gwyneth a student of the art. She saw a symbol of a system that now rewarded influence over integrity, shortcuts over substance. The rift deepened when Paltrow won the Academy Award for Shakespeare in Love in 1999. It was a year Meryl had delivered what many considered one of her most emotionally layered performances to date. Yet, it was Gwyneth who stood at the podium, tearful, radiant, and young. While Meryl never commented directly, insiders recalled her silence as telling. For a woman who had always praised her peers when praise was due, her omission spoke louder than words. What bothered Meryl most wasn't jealousy, it was disillusionment. Gwyneth had talent, that much was undeniable. But she lacked the hunger, the obsession with truth, the commitment to the inner scaffolding of a character that Meryl considered sacred. Her performances, though technically sound, often felt effortless in a way that suggested ease, not evolution. To Meryl, it was not enough to be good. One had to bleed for the role. In later years, Meryl gave interviews praising younger actresses, women like Saoirse Ronan, Florence Pugh, and Viola Davis, whose dedication reminded her of the standards she had fought to uphold. Gwyneth's name never came up. It didn't need to. Her exclusion was the statement. Even Paltrow's foray into lifestyle branding, her transformation from actress to wellness mogul, further cemented Meryl's silent critique. For someone who had built her career on authenticity, watching an actress pivot into commercialism only deepened her belief that the line between artist and celebrity had all but vanished. Theirs was never a feud. It was a quiet reckoning between two women, two eras, and two definitions of success. Meryl represented legacy built on rigor. Gwyneth, the evolution of stardom in a digital age. They never clashed in public, never sparred in interviews. But every time Meryl walked past Gwyneth on a red carpet, without a second glance, it was clear. This wasn't just personal. It was ideological. And in the end, it wasn't about dislike. It was about standards. And Meryl Streep has never lowered hers. For decades, Meryl Streep built her legacy not just on talent, but on discipline, intellect, and an unshakable belief in the integrity of performance. She did not shout her grievances. She did not engage in public battles. Instead, she chose silence, distance, and the unspoken power of saying no. And in that silence, a pattern emerged. A quiet blacklist of actors who challenged her values, disrupted her rhythm, or represented everything she believed Hollywood should never become. These 6 names were never about drama. They were about something deeper: standards, process, and the soul of the craft. Because for Meryl, acting was never a game. It was a responsibility. And when that responsibility was ignored, disrespected, or diluted, she remembered. She always remembered. Now, at this point in her life and career, she has nothing left to prove. She doesn't need to speak out. Her legacy does it for her. Her choices, her absences, her unwavering dedication, they all tell a story that every actor, every director, and every fan should hear. A story not about hate, but about how greatness refuses to compromise. If this deep dive into Meryl's untold truths gave you a new perspective, let us know in the comments. Which actor surprised you the most? And whose side are you on? Meryl's unbending pursuit of excellence, or the chaotic charm of her most frustrating collaborators? Hit like, subscribe, and stay tuned, because in our next episode, we're revealing the 3 legendary roles Meryl turned down that could have changed cinema history forever. You won't want to miss it.